I never thought a 10th birthday party could lead to a full-blown neighborhood scandal, but that's exactly what happened. On a sunny Saturday morning in Pinehurst Ridge, the backyard was buzzing with energy balloons tied to the fence posts, a giant bounce house swaying gently in, the breeze and tables lined with cupcake, streamers and goodie bags. My little sister Chloe was inside getting dressed, in her sparkly pink princess costume, completely unaware that her big day was about to hit a wall. We had invited all her friends from school, some cousins from out of town, and even a magician who was setting up by the gazebo. It was going to be the kind of party she'd remember forever. That is, until the HOA decided to crash it. It started with the sound of high heels on concrete. I turned around, and there she was, Linda Cooley, head of the Homeowners Association, strutting toward us in a navy pants suit and clipboard in hand like she was the sheriff of a lawless town. Her lips were pursed, her sunglasses mirrored the chaos of the bounce house behind me, and her voice cut through the music like a blade. "Do you have a permit for this gathering?" she asked in that condescending tone. Everyone in the neighborhood had grown to fear. I blinked, confused. "A permit for a birthday party on our own property?" She pointed to the sign at the edge of the community park, the one we shared with the other residents. Technically, the gazebo and picnic area were common property, and HOA policy now required prior approval for any group larger than 8 people. We had over 20 kids arriving in the next hour. I tried to explain, telling her that we'd cleared this with the previous HOA secretary weeks ago, that it was just a child's birthday party, that no one had ever enforced that rule before. Linda didn't care. She tapped her clipboard like it was a gavel. "Unapproved gathering, violation of section 4.2b. That's a $200 fine, and you need to shut this down immediately or we'll escalate." My mother came out just in time to hear the word fine, and her face went from confused to furious in seconds. "Are you serious? This is a 10-year-old's party. We're not throwing a rave." Linda smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Rules are rules. If we allowed one party, we'd have people barbecuing and playing music every weekend. This is a residential neighborhood." That was when the magician, unaware of the drama unfolding, shot off a confetti cannon behind us, startling everyone and sending Linda into a coughing fit. My dad rushed out trying to diffuse the situation, but it was no use. Linda had already pulled out her phone and was snapping photos like she was building a court case. Within 15 minutes, she had emailed a formal citation to our inbox. The party was effectively canceled. We had to send guests home as they arrived, watching little kids in birthday hats walk away holding unopened party favors and confused expressions. Chloe cried for an hour, and honestly, I couldn't blame her. What kind of grown adult shuts down a kid's party with cupcakes and magic tricks? The worst part was this wasn't an isolated incident. We soon found out that Linda had been targeting several families with similar nonsense. One neighbor got a fine for chalk drawings on her sidewalk, but something about what she did to Chloe flipped a switch in my family, especially when my cousin showed up later that night and heard the whole story. He's not just any cousin, he's a fire marshal, and when he heard about the clubhouse the HOA had just renovated using community funds, something in his expression changed. He didn't say much at first, just sipped his coffee and asked if we'd ever seen a fire inspection certificate for the place. We hadn't. In fact, no one we knew had. He nodded once, slow and deliberate, and said, "Maybe it's time someone took a closer look. The birthday party fiasco should have been the end of it. We thought once Linda had her power trip and sent out her ridiculous fine, she'd move on to harass someone else. We paid the $200 not because we agreed with it, but because we didn't want any more drama." But Linda wasn't finished with us, not even close. The very next morning, we found another notice taped to our front door. Improper placement of waste bin, $75 fine. Our Bins were at the curb like always like everyone else's. I looked up and down the street. Every single house had their bins in the same spot, but ours were the only ones with a bright orange violation slip. Flapping in the wind later that day, we got an email from the HOA about a new policy regarding lawn decorations. Apparently our garden gnome, a harmless little ceramic frog in a raincoat that my sister loved, was suddenly deemed non-compliant with community aesthetic guidelines. Another $50 fine. I wish I was making this up. It felt like we were being watched, like every move we made was being cataloged, judged, and punished. My mom started whispering when she talked about HOA matters. My dad got quiet, that kind of quiet where a storm is coming, and Chloe stopped playing outside altogether. That was when the neighbors started to notice Mr. Peterson across the street knocked on our door one evening holding his own citation. His mailbox, which had been there for over 15 years, was now 1 2 tall. He said he had never been fined before until he spoke up about what happened to our party 2 days later. He got hit with 3 violations in a row. The whole street was on edge. My dad tried to stay calm. He said maybe it was a coincidence, maybe the HOA had just gotten more strict. But then came the fire, not a literal one at least. Not yet. My cousin Jake, the fire marshal, started doing some digging of his own. He called a few contacts at the city office and learned something interesting. The Pinehurst Ridge HOA had submitted renovation plans for the community clubhouse about 6 months ago. They claimed it had passed inspection, but there was no official record of any fire safety audit, none zip, which meant that technically the clubhouse, the same one Lindo loved to show off at HOA meetings, might be in violation of several fire codes. Jake said he needed to take a look for himself. We didn't stop him that weekend under the guise of visiting for Sunday brunch. He strolled over to the clubhouse with his badge in his wallet and a clipboard in hand. He was in there for less than 20 minutes. When he came back, his face said, "Everything exits blocked by storage. Boxes, fire extinguisher expired. Emergency lighting disconnected, fire alarms disabled." He looked at my dad and said, "That place is a hazard. We need to report this." But he warned us too, if we went after Linda, we needed to be ready, because people like her don't back down easy. And he was right. That very night we received not 1 but 3 new citations. Decorative lights hung outside, seasonal period wind chimes considered a noise disturbance, and my personal favorite, inappropriate use of community park resources, referencing a completely fabricated claim that we had damaged the lawn during Chloe's birthday setup. All 3 came with fines. All 3 were time-stamped within the same hour. My mom was livid. My dad just stared at the stack of papers and said, "She's panicking. She knows something's coming." Jake agreed. He said Linda was probably aware someone had been inside the clubhouse, and now she was trying to scare us into backing off. But that wasn't going to happen, because what Linda didn't know was that Jake had already filed a formal request for an emergency fire safety inspection, and once that ball started rolling, there was no stopping it. The tension in our house was thick. Every day brought a new fine, a new email, a new passive-aggressive post from a whole Facebook page. But beneath the fear, something else was building. Anger, determination. We weren't just going to take this, we were going to fight back. And Jake, it was just getting started. It all started unraveling the moment Jake walked out of the clubhouse that Sunday afternoon with that look on his face, the one he usually had when he spotted violations at commercial buildings that could shut down entire businesses. He didn't say much at first, just sat at our kitchen table while Mom poured him coffee and Dad closed the blinds like someone might be watching us. Then Jake pulled out a small notepad and began listing what he saw: fire extinguishers, 2 years expired, exit signs flickering or completely dead, electrical panels exposed with wiring that looked like it was installed by Someone with zero certification, the worst part, the only visible emergency. Exit was blocked by stacked folding, tables and unopened boxes labeled party. Supplies if there had been a fire during one of those HOA meetings or an event. People could have been seriously hurt, or worse, that's when the shift happened. This wasn't just about fines or a birthday party anymore. This was about safety, about the HOA cutting corners and putting people at risk. Dad leaned in and asked the question we were all thinking. How could they have gotten this place approved for public use? Jake shook his head. They didn't, at least not legally. There was no inspection certificate on file, which means either they never requested one or someone fudged the paperwork. He paused and added quietly, if that's the case, we could be looking at more than just code violations. We might be looking at fraud. That word landed like a bomb in the room. Fraud had explained everything. The sudden wave of fines, a desperate power plays. Linda wasn't just enforcing rules, she was covering something up. Over the next few days, Jake started pulling threads. He filed an official request for access to the HOA's renovation permits, citing his authority as fire marshal. The HOA ignored the request, no surprise there, so he went a step further and contacted the local zoning office, who confirmed something stunning. The HOA had filed a notice of minor renovations, not major construction, which conveniently allowed them to bypass full inspections. But based on the photos Jake had taken, the clubhouse had been completely gutted and rebuilt inside. New flooring, new walls, new electrical. That wasn't minor. That was a full-blown remodel, and it should have triggered a comprehensive safety inspection, one that never happened. Meanwhile, the violations against our family kept piling up, and other fines showed up for flag hanging from our porch that apparently violated colored guidelines, and one for the garden hose not being properly coiled. It was petty, relentless, and starting to feel like harassment. But the real twist came when Jake got a call from someone at the fire department, an old colleague who had once done consulting work with HOA. He said quietly off the record that Pinehurst Ridge had applied for a fire inspection waiver about 6 months ago, claiming the clubhouse was closed for renovations and not being used. That would explain the missing paperwork, except the waiver expired 3 months ago, and the clubhouse had been open for HOA meetings and events for the past 6 weeks. That was a major violation. Jake smiled. For the first time in days, he said, now we've got them. He drafted a formal report and submitted it to the city's fire safety division, attaching his notes, photos, and the zoning discrepancies. At the same time, we started documenting everything. We took pictures of every fine, every misstep, every moment Linda or her board members violated the very rules they claimed to uphold, like Diane the treasurer parking her SUV half on the sidewalk every weekend, or Greg the vice president barbecuing with open flames at the community center, which was explicitly banned. We compiled all a digital folder called HOA Watch and quietly shared it with a few trusted neighbors. That's when things started to shift. Mr. Ramirez, 2 houses down, came over one evening holding a stack of HOA's newsletters from previous years. He pointed to a note about the clubhouse renovation, claiming it was fully approved and inspected. He looked us in the eye and said, I was at that meeting. Linda swore everything was by the book. She lied to all of us. More neighbors began sharing their own experiences. Mrs. Thomas, a retired nurse, said she was denied access to the clubhouse for a community health seminar because she hadn't submitted her request exactly 30 days in advance. Meanwhile, Linda had thrown her grandson's birthday party there with no notice at all. People were starting to connect the dots, and they weren't happy. The final piece fell into place when Jake discovered that the construction company hired for the renovation was owned by Linda's brother-in-law. No business license, no credentials, just a name and a check paid from HOA funds. We were no longer just a family under attack. We were the whistleblowers, and what started with a canceled birthday party had become a mission to uncover the truth. The Clubhouse wasn't just a building, it was a ticking time bomb of negligence, corruption and lies, and thanks to Jake, we had just lit the fuse, you'd think. After being voted out and exposed in front of the entire neighborhood, Linda would pack up and disappear quietly, but people like her never go down without a fight within days of the emergency. Meeting the retaliation began, it started. Small, our mailbox was knocked over in. The middle of the night, trash was dumped. Across our front yard, someone rang our doorbell at 3 a.m. and ran off before we could catch them, but it escalated. Quickly, my dad's work email was bombarded with anonymous complaints. My mom got a letter threatening legal action for defamation. Even Chloe's school received a bizarre call suggesting we were an unstable family and that someone should check on her well-being. It was obvious Linda was trying to make our lives hell even from the outside, but the thing is, every one of those actions just proved we were getting closer to something bigger. That's when Jake received a brown envelope at the fire department, postmarked with no return address. Inside were scanned copies of HOA financial documents, completely different from the ones Linda had submitted publicly. These showed inflated figures, double payments, and a contractor invoice that was outright forged. It was a smoking gun. We didn't know where it came from, but we had a guess, someone close to Linda, someone who'd finally had enough. Jake took the new documents to the city attorney, and within 48 hours the case had moved from investigation to active review. Things snowballed from there. The local news station got wind of the story. At first, it was just a short segment about a corrupt HOA in a closed-down clubhouse. But then neighbors started talking more. People came forward. Mrs. Reynolds from 2 streets over said Linda fined her for having her porch light on past 11 p. And Mr. Harris said he was written up for allowing his grandkids to draw chalk art on his driveway. A woman named Nina shared that she'd been threatened with foreclosure over a garden trellis. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern of full-blown abuse of power, hiding behind petty rules and technicalities. The HOA had become Linda's personal kingdom, and she had ruled it with fear and favoritism. That's when the neighborhood really came together. Mr. Jackson organized a community meeting at his house, this time without permission, and no one cared. People packed into his living room, spilling into the kitchen and hallway, some even sitting on the stairs. We brought printed copies of the fake invoices and questionable receipts. Ms. Wong, a retired CPA, offered to help build a financial report for the authorities. Mr. Patel volunteered to contact the DA's office directly. It wasn't just about fixing the rules anymore, it was about justice. Then came the biggest twist. Diana, Linda's own daughter, she showed up at her door late one evening, eyes puffy, like she'd been crying for days. She handed my dad a USB drive and said my mom kept everything, every payment, every email, every deal. She said it was for protection in case someone ever turned on her, but I can't keep her secrets anymore, not after what she did to all of you, not after what I found out about the money. And just like that, everything Linda tried to hide came spilling into the light. The drive contained copies of HOA budgets going back 6 years, emails between board members discussing how to target specific residents, notes about who to find and when, and perhaps worst of all, a thread where Linda instructed Diane, the treasurer, to quietly move HOA funds into a separate account for discretionary spending, money with no oversight, no record, no approval. We handed everything over to the investigators. The next week, Linda was served with subpoena. Cameras showed up on our street, news crews, reporters, headlines, corruption and quiet community. HOA under criminal probe, and through it, all our families stayed calm, focused. We didn't start this war, but we sure as hell were going to finish at the end. Didn't come with sirens or dramatic arrests, but with a quiet knock on our door, and a plain envelope handed to my dad by a city official inside was a formal notice from the district attorney's office. Linda Crowley and two former HOA board members were being indicted on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. It was surreal. The woman who once fined us for having wind chimes too loud was now facing actual jail time that night. As the news broke across every local channel, neighbors gathered on our front lawn with folding chairs and snacks, watching the story unfold like it was the season finale of a long-running drama. We didn't cheer, we didn't gloat, we just exhaled the weight that had hung over our community for months had finally lifted. But the real victory came days later during the first HOA meeting under new leadership. It was held in the newly re-inspected and certified Clubhouse, fully up to code now thanks to Jake's team. Mr. Jackson was elected president by unanimous vote. Miss Wong was appointed treasurer, and the new board made sweeping changes. Out went the arbitrary fines and came transparency. A new website was launched with every policy clearly listed, every financial transaction logged and visible to homeowners. Open forum sessions were introduced. Anonymous complaint forms were banned. The fear was gone, replaced by something Pinehurst Ridge hadn't felt in years, trust. And then came the moment we never expected. At the end of the meeting, Mr. Jackson called our family to the front of the room. He said, if it weren't for the Reynolds family, none of this would have come to light. You stood up when everyone else was afraid. You refused to be bullied, and thanks to you, this community has a future again. People clapped, some stood. Chloe, standing between my parents, beamed like she had just won an award at school. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about healing. A week later, we finally threw her 10th birthday party, this time in the very clubhouse Linda once used to hold. Court balloons were tied to every post. Cupcakes covered the tables. Kids ran wild through the hallways while parents laughed and talked like old friends. There were no citations, no interruptions, just joy as the sun set and the music played. Jake stood next to me with a soda in one hand and a grin on his face. Funny, he said, all this over a birthday party. I nodded. Sometimes it only takes one spark to burn down a rotten system. We watched as Chloe blew out her candle surrounded by friends, and I realized something. What started as a small act of defiance had grown into a movement. We didn't just fix a clubhouse, we rebuilt a community, and this time no one was going to take it away from us. Life lessons from the canceled birthday party that changed a neighborhood. What started as a ruined birthday party turned into a powerful lesson in standing up for what's right, and it holds some real value for life in today's America. First, never underestimate the power of one voice, whether at a child's party or an unfair citation. Speaking up can reveal deeper issues hiding beneath the surface. Many people stay silent out of fear, especially in communities where power is concentrated in the hands of a few, but silence enables abuse. That's why courage, especially when backed by facts, is contagious. Second, know your rights. Homeowners associations, employers, institutions, they all rely on the assumption that most people won't read the fine print, but knowledge is power. In this story, it was a mix of legal understanding, professional experience, and detailed documentation that helped take down a corrupt system in your own life, whether it's reading contracts, understanding local policies, or asking the right questions. Don't let others take advantage of what you don't know. Third, community matters. Real change rarely happens alone. It took neighbors talking, sharing stories, and finally organizing for accountability to happen. In a time where individualism is often celebrated, we forget that strength still lies in connection. The more we support each other, the harder it becomes for bad actors to divide and conquer. And lastly, justice takes time, but it's worth the fight. It would have been easier for this family to pay the fines and move on, but doing the hard things, standing firm, gathering evidence, and following through led to lasting change. That a message we all need when facing corruption, or unfair treatment. Today, what about you have you ever experienced unfair treatment from a local authority or HOA? Do you think people should always fight back, or is it sometimes smarter to walk away? But what you have done if this happened in your neighborhood?